So we're just about ready to start our second panel of the day on education issues, and joining us today on this panel, we have someone you've already probably met and recognized and spoke with, Ruth Corfield, who is, as you know, been an advocate for education, public education, and is a teacher in the Flemington and Raritan School District. So she has a very unique perspective on this.
A little bit about what's going on in education at the state level. I was at a party recently with people who have older children and children that go to private schools, and we started talking about education reform in the state, and they said to me, well, you know, what are some of the states that have really good education systems? And I said, New Jersey. New Jersey has one of the top 3 public education systems in the country. You get every dime for your school tax dollars if you send your children to public schools in the overwhelming majority, over 90% of our school districts. We have small pockets of schools that are not meeting AYP. We have small pockets of what education reformers like to call failing schools. We do not have failing schools in this state. We have schools in high poverty districts. These schools are not failing, and that's the biggest myth right there. Poverty, there is a direct and real and very serious correlation between a level of poverty in a child's family and their ability to learn. I work in an affluent school district, Flemington, Raritan. My school is a Title I school, which means we get funding for free and reduced lunch programs. We are not at the level of schools, say, in Camden or Newark or Patterson, but I see these kids. I see these kids that come in every day. I have first graders, second graders come in, poor kids, minority kids, kids who don't speak English as their first language. Some of them don't know their parents' names. Some of them don't know their last name. Some of them don't know if they have older brothers and sisters. They don't know their older brothers and sisters' names. They don't know their own birthday. I've had kids in 3rd and 4th grade who don't know their address. These are children who have grown up with 3 strikes against them. And the cuts that are being made to women's health care, the cuts that we talked about earlier, the cuts that are being made to education are directly affecting these kids. The states in the country with the best education systems, New York, Massachusetts, and I believe the other one is Vermont, have the strongest teachers' unions. A lot of people in this state, our governor especially, loves to bash the NJEA. And I'm a proud union member, I'm a proud NJEA member, and I will say a couple of things about them, but I do want to talk about other issues. NJEA is responsible for the largest education professional development seminar in the country for teachers. The NJEA convention is a huge seminar for professional development. You can go down there and learn anything about everything that you want to learn about any subject that you teach. Strong unions make strong public schools. There are a lot of myths that are being perpetrated by Governor Christie, by the American Legislative Exchange Council, which has been in the news a lot lately, the past couple of weeks, because all of a sudden the jig is up for a lot of corporations and they have been outed and they're pulling out. But the tenure reforms, the evaluation reforms, the voucher bill, the charter schools this is all legislation that has been written and basically sold to states throughout the country by ALEC. The voucher program. The voucher program, interestingly, is going to benefit a very small pocket of people in a little town in South Jersey called Lakewood. Lakewood has a large number of Orthodox Jews. They have a large number of yeshivas, and students and families who are already, and this is not just my opinion, there has been a lot of controversy and a lot of articles written about this. Families who already have children in private schools are going to be able to take advantage of the voucher program. And the Lakewood school community is majority private schools. And students who are, I believe it's 250 to 300% above the poverty line will be able to take advantage of the vouchers, and students who are already in private schools. So that school district is going to be decimated if this voucher program goes through. There are not enough private schools in the Abbott districts to support all of these students in quote-unquote failing schools. If every child in every failing school wants to take advantage of vouchers, there aren't enough seats in these private schools for them. So how we can offer that to students and families as an alternative is ridiculous, because people will be left out. These private schools and charter schools do not have to accept every child that comes knocking at their door. Public education is a constitutional right. Public schools have to take every child, regardless of who they are, what baggage they come with, what abilities they have, what abilities they don't have. The schools in the voucher program, charter schools, do not. They may accept students at first, they may accept any child at first, but you have to look at their attrition rates, and that is the key. There are people who support public education who spend a lot of time researching the attrition rates in these private and charter schools, and many of the students who are discipline problems, who are special education, who are English language learners, are what we call counseled out. Eventually, after a year or two, they are told, well, you know, this really isn't the best place for you. Arne Duncan, Secretary of Education, made the famous quote after Hurricane Katrina, saying that Hurricane Katrina was the best thing to happen to New Orleans public schools. It wiped out their entire school system. They are now 70 to 80% charters. I follow a woman on Facebook and Twitter who is one of the Parents Across America founders, who is a big advocate for public schools and against what has happened in New Orleans. And she has a part-time job. It's free. She does this on a volunteer basis, counseling people in New Orleans about how to get their children enrolled in charter schools. I mean, this has come down to basically applying to colleges, you know, and we're talking about elementary schools. You do not have the luxury in New Orleans of walking up to your neighborhood school and signing your child up and enrolling them for their first day of school. It doesn't work that way. The charter school approval process, the board at the state level here in New Jersey that approves charter schools is overwhelmingly made up of pro-charter school people. I don't think there are any, I think there might be one public education professional on the panel. Everyone else is made up of pro-charter school supporters. The federal government's approval process for charters is basically, if the states approve it, they just give it a blind rubber stamp. And I get these two mixed up. It was either the Tickham-Olam Charter School, the Franklin Park one, or I think that was the one. There were major flaws on that application, and those charter school owners were able to get $600,000 from the federal government in startup costs for that school, despite the fact that there were glaring errors in their application. And finally, through a lot of pressure from activists, they withdrew their application, and they are not going to open. Right now, with the redo of, well, I want to talk a little bit about tenure. Tenure is interesting because tenure and merit pay are very interesting topics, because a lot of people, friends of mine included, you know, they've said, well, you know, merit pay, well, we should pay teachers merit pay. Definitely, we should pay them more. But when merit pay is going to be based up to 50% on standardized tests that happen one day out of the school year, tests that are flawed, tests that are not developmentally appropriate for either special needs students or gifted and talented students, it's not a fair process. Interestingly, our governor and Education Commissioner Chris Cerf and other Republicans want to change tenure so drastically so as to be meaningless. However, and all in the name of education reform. However, do you ever notice that tenure is not a problem in places like Hillsborough, Mendham, Flemington, Raritan, Livingston? You know, all those students, I mean, sure, there are bad teachers in everywhere. There are bad attorneys, there are bad accountants, there are bad doctors, there are bad car repair people. But tenure seems to only be a problem to our governor in our failing school districts. So does that mean that every bad teacher works in Camden? Every bad teacher works in Newark or Patterson or Perth Amboy? It's the logic, or the lack of logic, is baffling, and it's completely transparent. But this is a problem. So the solution, one of the solutions that the governor is pushing, is to have a tenure process that removes tenure, that you can lose tenure, but you can still teach. So think about that. You have a doctor who loses their license. You still want that? You're still going to go to that doctor? I wouldn't. You have an attorney who's been disbarred. You going to go hire that attorney and let them represent you in law? I wouldn't. But yet our governor wants to take tenure away from teachers, but if they work hard, and, then they can get it back. Well, what would that do? Let's say this school district here in Hillsborough, you're facing a budget shortfall. Not that you guys would do this, but this is the scenario that is being put into place. Who do we have that's working 35 years? They're at the top of the salary guide. What could we do to get rid of them? Oh, we could give them a couple of failing evaluations. We could have them lose tenure. They'd still have their job. But now, we have to cut staff. Okay, we have to cut staff. Who are we going to cut? The non-tenured teachers. It's a system that does nothing more than get rid of experienced teachers, and it's one of the only professions now where experience doesn't count. I know we're out of time, but one last thing I want to talk about is that Senator Doherty is pushing a flat funding fee for every child for public education, and it's a really scary prospect because it ties in with the separate and unequalness that's going on, not only in women's health, but with the way many people, with poverty also, because it does cost more to educate a child who comes from a poor background. But New Jersey is the leader, even though we have a large education gap between our wealthy suburbs and our poor inner cities. We have done more than any other state in the country in closing that achievement gap, and it's in great part to the Abbott rulings and the school funding formula that gives extra money to those inner city districts. And Senator Doherty wants to have a flat funding per child, no matter where they live, no matter what their ability, no matter what their disability. And somewhere, somehow, somebody has to make up the difference. And sooner or later, whether we like it or not, it will come out of our pockets. I'm going to stop there, but I could go on forever. So thank you.
Any questions? Go ahead.
Yes, about charter schools. I've never understood how a school can be allowed to come in and start teaching children without any proof that it's an effective school, that it has been or has the facilities, the resources to be an effective school. How is that? How does that work out? And how is it monitored? After it's been in operation for a year, sucking money from public school and sending, hapless students to be taught by it.
It's not. It's absolutely not. There were 2 major studies done within the past 3 years, both funded by the big education reformer Bill Gates. He wanted to prove that charter schools were effective, more effective than public schools. Both of those studies found that charter schools on the whole are no better than public schools. Many of them are worse. Why they are allowed to proliferate? American Legislative Exchange Council. They have pushed through this legislation in many states across this country, and we have a governor who has pushed and cajoled and twisted arms and made backroom deals, and with many people, with many Democrats have jumped ship on certain legislation, unfortunately, to allow certain things to go through. And expansion of charter schools is one of them. Chris Cerf said over a year ago that he would produce facts and figures that prove that charter schools in this state are doing well, and he has not produced one shred of evidence. It's all about money. These schools are for-profit entities. Their number one goal is making a profit.
I was going to say follow the money.
Yeah.
If you look at the corporate, quote, corporations and see who makes up the board of directors of their corporations and how they're tied politically to certain politicians, you follow the money. Privatization does not mean better. Privatization just means for profit. And if it fails, the kids go back to public school, for which the standardized tests are given. So children who go into these charter schools, if their parents are not very careful in examining what they're going to get there, these kids lose time, they lose the curriculum on which they're going to be tested, as well as in preparation for further schooling. It's a very dangerous process. It's one that is not transparent. And when a governor says, I'm for charter schools, but does not want strict oversight, there's a big question mark. You need greater regulation of charter schools where you're allowing them carte blanche to pretty much do what they want, because they're not subject to the same rules and regulations of public schools, and they get to pick their students. Public schools do not get to pick their students. If I, as a teacher, get to pick my students, I could do very well on my standardized tests. I just have a select group, there's no problem. But I want to react to tenure. I'm old enough to know when that law was first put into effect. And you know how it was put into effect? Fred Hipp, who was the first director, teaching jobs, the way you got a teaching job was to know the mayor. And you had to know people of influence. There were no standards for teacher certification or anything else. It was the spoils system like you could never believe. And what Fred Hipp did was to shadow the meetings of mayors with certain people. And he got incontrovertible evidence that was presented to the legislature of how jobs were being bought. The mayor's cousin, his brother-in-law, they got teaching jobs. Whether you were hired or fired depended on who you knew politically. That was put on the legislature, and I'm talking about tapes, meetings, surveillance, and it demonstrated that public school teachers got their jobs not because they were good at their job or even qualified for their job. It was just another a public service job that was a giveaway. And a political process, and that's why the tenure law was put in place. And I have yet to hear from this governor or anybody who wants reform of tenure how they're going to prevent that from reoccurring.
Well, thank you. This is a topic we know that could go into extensive detail, and it deserves to have that kind of conversation. We'll hopefully have another opportunity to do so. Thank you all very much. It was very informative. Just so people can understand a little bit about ALEC, they also supported a little law down in Florida called Stand Your Ground. So that kind of puts a whole another perspective on what they're doing across the country. So it's a lot of scary things going on. We should have a session just on that. We should.